Hi everyone, welcome to eLearnChat, where it is all about learning. And with us today, we've got Dr. Susan Nash. Hey Susan, how are you?
Good. Lots of things to talk about today.
There's always a lot of stuff to talk about. And joining us, and we had a cancellation today, a rescheduling I should say. David Kelly was going to be on from the Learning Guild. Unfortunately, he had another commitment, he couldn't make it. So we have him rescheduled. I will let you know the dates as soon as we do. And joining us today will be Harold Muliati. He's our video producer. He's also going to help with the co-hosting a little bit. And here we go. This show is sponsored by Relate Corporation. Visit us at www.relatecasts.net. Thanks. And we are back. And Susan, how are you doing?
Oh, great. And I'm so excited to talk about a few things about just like operations in the average e-learning shop.
That sounds like a good one. Operations in e-learning. That's a very good one because in many cases it's thing non-existent. So let's talk about operations. So what did you have in mind?
Well, I was thinking about, for example, how people basically do their project management and different philosophies, whether they use Basecamp or Trello or now I'm seeing a lot of people just go ahead and using either like Office with their with Teams or Google Docs. So they're just different ways to do it, and some are almost free and others are quite expensive.
Yeah, like for example, in the old days, people would use Microsoft Project. And Project,
yes.
You needed a full-time person to manage Project rather than to manage the project. And so very few people use Project anymore. And there are tools like Basecamp, which is pretty good. I mean, Basecamp, all of these tools are basically advanced task managers more than totally real project managers. But we're in the e-learning world, and it's usually not that complex. Unless you're doing a very long set of development where you've got maybe dozens and dozens of modules and a lot of resource dependencies. For the most part, you don't need anything much more than a task manager. Well, what do you think?
I think that's true. It depends on what you're working on. I mean, for example, if you're doing a lot of e-learning that has to do with different applications of Python and coding, I would recommend using Slack in a lot of it, just because you can actually work with the code and trade code, and it doesn't hang up. Whereas if you have things like, and another thing too, it depends on who you want to contact. So if it's like a coding course and you're working with checking code and you have somebody who's dedicated, who's all, like making sure that it works, which is useful. And you can say that with publications as well. You can set it up so part of it's in Slack and the rest of it's in just say Google Sheets or Teams or something like that.
Now, Slack is owned by Microsoft, if I'm not wrong, correct?
I don't know. That's a good question.
I thought they were. I'm not sure. Harold, do you know?
Well, yeah, I don't know precisely, but speaking of that, I do see what you're saying, where it's somewhere between having a project manager like Basecamp or something that has things organized into projects and just being on calls where it's a single stream of what people are saying, but then you can go back and refer to things like you said if you need to copy code or something like that. So I see where you're coming from on that end.
Well, and I think the worst part in that, and also in last week we talked about doing different kinds of assessments and building quizzes and things. I think in general, the biggest problem is version control. And so, whatever you're using, it needs to be robust enough that lots of people can touch it without destroying it. And then be careful to be disciplined to go ahead and make a separate folder for each version. Because otherwise, I mean, oh my gosh, I've been in projects where you're just pulling out your hair because you're redoing the same things or finding the same errors.
And it even starts with something simple as naming your files correctly, adding dates to your file names, things like that, even adding dates and versions, because you may have 2 versions in one day. That helps. Things that you can go back and say, okay, we just made 4 changes, 2 at one time, 2 at another time. We published and they didn't like it again, or we were doing QA. So yeah, and it's a little tedious, but it does save a lot of headache, especially if you've got fluid projects where things are changing really, really fast. And, it shouldn't be that fast, but more often than not, you've got something that just has to be done. And they want to see it as it's developing. Or worse yet, you're developing work as the software or the process is being developed at the same time.
Well, and the thing with that is it really benefits you on 2 fronts, because when you're at the bleeding edge like that, then having proper version control and proper naming schemes and that sort of thing helps you. But also, years down the line, when a project comes back, then you can much more easily find which was the right version because you actually organized it correctly.
Well, that's true.
That is a tough one.
Yeah, and Rick, you brought up something that happens a lot. Okay, so if it's training on something like a certain version of Python, or even like a certain version of Moodle or whatever, many times the version is changing as you're creating the training for it.
Yep.
And so that's very interesting. And then your screenshots all have to be redone, and all sorts of things, because it changes appearance as well.
Yeah, and again, in business, for example, when you're developing applications, many times those applications are being actually developed as you're developing the training for them. So the training may change more than once as you go. More often than not, you might have 2, 3, 4 iterations of the training because they've really got rapid deadlines and they need you that quick to be able to go live. And so it makes for an interesting experience.
And there's also a related thing that actually I think we may have talked about this last time, so sorry if I'm repeating what we said. Occasionally when you're training for a program, you have to make sure that the people you're training to are using the same version that you're basing the training off of, because sometimes
that too.
They might not have access to the same features that you're showing or something like that, and then it's obviously not very useful.
Well, here's one that's real common. You have Articulate 360. You're doing something in Storyline. You've got the team version of it. You've got 4 or 5 people, and only 2 of the PCs were updated. You've got 3 other people who forgot to update their PCs and they're doing something totally different. It may or may not be an issue, but you will most likely run into bugs in one, bugs in the other. They won't be the same bugs. You may have some other issues. And that becomes a nightmare trying to figure out, wait a minute, who did what? Hold on. What we usually do, for example, before we start a project, we make sure everyone is on the same exact version number.
Oh, absolutely.
Otherwise, it's hellacious. Yep.
It just won't work at all. And you're right. And I mean, and the worst part is it does seem to kind of work.
Because then you don't know right away.
And it can work for the most part, but then you run into little nuances. Or bug A, which was 3 versions back and is still there, all of a sudden is fixed. And you don't need to do a workaround. Or they introduced a workaround that breaks other things, and you got to figure that one out. And we've been through a lot of that. And same with all of the authoring tools. It's not just Storyline. I'm just using them as an example. But these are real issues, especially. And now with people working remotely more, you've just made that problem 10 times worse, because now you've got to make sure you communicate with all the people. You're all on the same boat, if you will, and you literally have to do a little bit of, okay, what version are you on? Read me the number. Okay, you need to upgrade. Or, good, next one. What version are you on? No, wrong version. You're 2 back. What are you doing? We need to update. And then you can't really start until people are all on the same version. Because usually what we do in the whole e-learning multimedia thing is teams. There are teams of people. You've got graphic designers, you've got instructional designers, you've got maybe proofreaders. You may have a certain kind of tech writer. You may have, what else? Video editors, video shooters, audio people, voice talents, blah, 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 blah. And you've got a lot of people, including project managers, maybe other managers, supervisors. And then you have your account managers who manage the people, or the customer managers. It can get pretty out of control pretty quickly. Communication.
Right. And I think speaking of out of control, I think that since a lot of people will be touching the same document, for example, in the development of a course, if you have a folder, and let's just use Google Docs because it's free. Let's say, okay, you go into Google Docs and you've got your folders and you're using probably Word, but you're uploading it and it's converting it into Google Docs, Google Drive. It's all in Google Drive. Well, so then the challenge, I think, is when there are more comments than there is actual text from everybody making comments.
Yeah, that becomes a pain.
It's really messy, and it's easy to miss a comment and then go back around. Did you see that? You missed my comment. So I mean, you almost have to always acknowledge, even if it doesn't require an action. Say, okay, saw it that said blah blah blah, Susan. Then you have to say, okay, thank you, saw it, or smiley face or something.
Yeah,
we had one. She was a kind of a proof editor. It didn't last long, but anyway, so I remember we had one project. I had to rewrite a lot of things, and so I would write. I would have a version number and everything, and I would pass it by her for a final something or other, and then move it up to our database, if you will.
Production.
So not quite into production, but ready to be recorded, maybe. So, so she would get in and she would look at it, and then she'd make changes. I go, what are you doing? Just make random changes, and then I go back the next day. All the stuff I wrote was gone, and you just go. Well, after about 2 or 3 times of that, she was gone. But that was just another issue.
Well, I mean, one thing about making it cloud-based, at least you can well, you can with Word too.
We were able to go back to a previous version, but it required, but you still required a lot of rework because you had to make sure it was actually there. And that's the kind of stuff that you run into all the time. I would love to see. There is one I know that's out there, and it's called Junto, Xunto, and that's out of Montreal, and they have a kind of an instructional design front end that's online, so you can have all your changes tracked, everything, and you can even write your script, all of that, right in that tool. And that's a pretty cool tool. I don't know how well they're doing after the pandemic type stuff, but he had just launched it right before that. And it was pretty neat. There was still some features that were coming, but it's been a 5-year development for that tool, and it was cool what they've done, maybe even longer. But there's no other ones like that. There's very few, and so as a result, we're all still stuck in the more manual Word, Pages, whatever you use, Google Docs, which lend themselves to errors.
Oh, they definitely do. They definitely do. And you just, after a while, you feel like you're going blind looking at all of it.
I know.
Now, one of my favorites, go ahead.
No, I was just going to ask you, you've written a lot of stuff. You write books, you write articles. What do you usually use as your writing tool?
Okay, well, it depends on what it is, but I will say that I just usually use Microsoft Word, but that can be problematic based on all the macros that are built in it.
Yeah.
So sometimes I'll strip out the macros and then but I do like using either Teams, depending on where we are and what we're having to do, or just using Google Docs. I've been in situations where we've gone back and forth to Basecamp and Trello, and Trello is pretty good because it will trigger you, and it will also let you link out to the different platforms that you're using, like Soft Chalk or whatever, the tools that you're using to build things.
Yeah.
But
we've got a comment from Charlene Dewbre. Hi, Char.
Hey, Char.
She said, "That's difficult to implement at scale, though. This is why we do our drafts, to catch comments or changes that may have been missed. Adding a peer review to the process where someone can look at the comments and the draft might catch those misses with less time impact on the technical writer.
Yeah, and by the way, Char has been one of our instructional designers for years. She's a good friend, and she's done a ton of ID work with us.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I like what she's saying. Yeah.
And she's
well, and I think
it
depends. Again, a lot of it depends on your topic, and it depends on what you're asking people to do. If it's like we talked about last week, it's all in one. SME, ID, instructional designer, plus graphic artist, plus proofreader.
And then you bring in the psychoanalyst because we need help after all that. So all of us.
But you're talking about one of my favorite tools I've ever used, and I don't see that many people using it anymore, but I loved it. It was Panopto.
I've heard of it. I never used it. Now, what was Panopto?
Yeah, well, it was, right now, a lot of times I find myself using Screencast-O-Matic or whatever for creating narrated videos.
Yeah.
But Panopto was just so great. I mean, I had been using Camtasia, and then I started using that, and it made it so easy to edit what you were doing. I mean, it's pretty easy to record most of those things, but editing is a different animal.
Yeah, we still use Camtasia. We use ScreenFlow for on a Mac. And there are other ones, but we've been using them for years, so we're pretty comfy with them, and it just depends what you need done. Of course, in the video world, you don't have that interactivity easily. So that's something else. I still think that Adobe and Apple did a great disservice to the whole learning community by getting rid of Flash, both of them.
Yeah.
Two egos got involved and ruined the whole industry. I just love it. Adobe should never have caved to Apple, and Apple should have been like, who cares? Get a faster iPhone. That's why they were complaining. It was too slow. So, which is funny because on the other hand, all of the games written for the iPhone, like the very popular ones, they were all written in Flash or Director, which converted to Flash. So it wasn't Flash that was an issue. It was just one of those. And I still wish we had Flash back because dealing with HTML is a pain in the derriere in every which way. Every browser is different.
HTML5, HTML. Yeah, it is.
It's such a pain.
XML.
It just adds one more fun thing to our jobs because now you've gotten past the writing, past the authoring, past this, that. The client actually approves it, then it doesn't work in HTML.
And
the LMS doesn't support it.
From what I've seen, things that do anything that are more complex in HTML5 aren't really using HTML5. What they end up doing is they use an embedded plugin like ClickTeam Fusion or Unity or something like that. If it's anything past just the normal showing HTML elements, showing videos and stuff like that, no one wants to touch it with, even though HTML5 can do it, it's just no one wants to touch it because you don't know if the browser is going to show it the same way that you're seeing it in your tool.
But you don't see much of that in the learning world.
No,
you rarely see Unity or any of that in learning. You might, but it's rare.
It just gets too involved.
Yep.
It's not.
I guess you see those, mainly with websites. I mean, like a lot of stuff with, Ruby on Rails, I guess, is having some kind of resurgence.
Well, yeah, but that's not for training. That's really for developing your a web-based or a data-driven web application and website and stuff. It's pretty cool, but you have to know enough to be able to code that. And you have to understand data-driven structures, which is not in the e-learning purview for the most part.
And Char gave another comment. She said, agreed, too many supported doc types.
Oh, yeah. Well, I'm on board with that one.
Yeah. At least SWF was easy. Everybody knew it. Stupid work file. It was perfect. Yeah. It just worked. So.
Well, and another thing too, we talked about last week, creating engaging learning. And I was thinking about some of the obligatory training that we have for phishing and there's one company, it's called Know Before, that puts together scenarios, and they actually have actors that go in and come in and, you know, have the scenario where they're stealing people's information and doing social engineering, et cetera. And so those are fun. I'm wondering, you know, like that's like you were talking about video, it brings an entirely different kind of dynamic. I mean, first of all, you have to storyboard really well because you've got to figure out, like, the quizzes are, you know, always like just multiple choice at the end. But is there any better way to do that?
Not in video, not easily. You could do video scenarios or something, but you would still need some sort of HTML question machine, if you will, or generate that in a regular authoring tool, the other part of it. So video learning is great because it's a little more dynamic, it's a little more interesting. You can cut time in video training from maybe a lot of pages to less, you know, to less scenes, if you will. But again, it depends what you're training or what it is. Like soft skills, yeah, you could easily do that with video. Not so easy with software simulations. There, you probably need something a little bit better. I've seen people do software simulations and it just aren't as good. They're okay, unless you just want to show it. You're not really teaching them. You're just showing them, here's how to do it. Now go do it.
We had some training yesterday that was actually synchronous, but we recorded it, so it's going to be asynchronous. And it's like, I don't know. So the instructor said, okay, this was for taking self-assessments and career planning. And he said, okay, please email out the document. And I put it in the chat. We did it through Zoom. So that was good. Everybody got it. And the idea was to print it out and write with the idea that you do a lot more. Your mind and your brain is triggered more if you're doing this kinesthetic stuff. You're actually working with the pen and paper.
Yeah.
But I mean, okay, so that's all well and good in terms of activity. But I'm just at a loss to see how we can assess that.
It's hard. It's hard. That's a problem with assessments, period. A lot of times, how do you really test productivity? It's a tough one.
And, I mean, you're almost, yeah, go ahead.
Sorry, Char has another comment on that. Your previous thing you were saying, Susan. She says, it does, like the know before stuff, but there's still a real lack of interactivity. However, it's supported by real life dynamics. For instance, after they train, they send you mock phishing emails, and if you don't exhibit correct behaviors, you have to retrain. Good stuff.
That's true. Yeah, that's true. I usually don't fall for it. And then we'll usually have a few things at work that I wonder if it's actually the IT guys just having fun with us.
Well, there is that too. You can't trust the IT guys. They're going after easy victims. Yep. Yeah, we believe people. No. Can't trust the IT guys. They have way too much fun with that stuff. But that's true. Let's see. We've kind of covered a couple of different stuff, from project management to some of the other things involved with it. One thing I think we need to dedicate some more time to is also the role of emotion in learning.
Oh, yes.
I've given talks on this, and it's really key because people don't remember things that don't carry an emotion. Any kind, whether it's happy, sad, miserable, angry, disgusted, those emotions are going to be remembered. But you won't remember anything that just is pap and it is nothing. You don't even relate to it. So at that point, look how often we miss opportunities in training to give it some sort of emotion, something that people can hold on to a little bit rather than just facts.
Well, and unfortunately, I suspect the most common emotion people get from it is going to be one of frustration or exasperation.
Hate. Yeah, I hate these courses.
And about your comment about the IT guys before, Char said, out to get us.
Out to get us.
No, it's true. I mean, and like, okay, so Gagne talked about conditions of learning, and it's exactly what you said. It's all about provoking some kind of emotion, and sometimes the emotion is pretty bland. It's like curiosity.
Well, yeah, you know, to even have an emotion, you've got to be ready to have an emotion. Some people are so flat. Period. And for example, if you're trying to teach IT people emotionally, good luck. You're dealing usually with high-level Asperger's, and they're not that emotional. They don't care about the emotion. They just want to get it done, get out, and go back to do some programming or whatever they're doing, hassling training departments, all the important things.
I beg to differ. I think that Char actually nailed it. It's Schadenfreude. That's their.
That's funny. But
they gloat over how they can do things to torture us.
Yep, it is. Yeah. Well, I've said this before. I used to run IT departments, so I kind of know. But no, we didn't do that often. Not often, at least. But we had one guy. I worked at one company. It was a big insurance brokerage firm, and we had one user who cleverly figured out how to send control characters to the director of IT's monitor. It was beyond clever.
Oh, no.
About once or twice a day, the guy's monitor would just blank out. And he's like, what just happened? And we're shaking our head. I don't know. So then we started putting a tracer on what was going on, and we saw a control character coming in. And then I went to talk to Jimmy. Jimmy, what are you doing? What do you mean? You're sending control characters to the director, and he's not happy. So it was sort of fun. But yeah, it's amazing. So that was where IT got it back. It was sort of funny. Char's probably going, yeah, good. So anyway, well, gosh, we're almost at the end of the show. We fixed 3/4 of the e-learning problems today. Class,
yes, we did.
Next week, we're going to have a test on this, so be ready. And we're not going to do an online test. We're going to do it via paper. Why not? We vote via paper now. We don't even do online voting anymore. So just do it by paper. Send it in, and we'll look at it. If we don't like it, we'll throw it out. So, that's about how bad it gets sometimes. I remember being in a class when I was in high school. It was an English teacher. I went to visit his office afterwards. He wasn't there because we were using one of their quote-unquote mimeograph machines back then. That's before copiers. And he had this board, and it said fail, not fail, good, bad. And so he would throw darts, and that's kind of how you got graded. It was really scary. I never knew if that was a joke or if he actually used it, but that was high school. Long time ago.
Wanted a better grade, should have dodged it.
Yeah. I don't know why that reminiscent maybe triggered something, but I thought, okay, people think about how to do their careers, and they think about, okay, you get all these things about how you need to build yourself and your persona in LinkedIn. But then, okay, so everybody's good with inventing themselves, but how do you uninvent yourself once you're in that role? And what are exactly the steps to? Well,
the first step is you log off of LinkedIn, delete your account, and start over. Nobody will remember at all. They'll not remember. Gone. So you can start fresh.
That's true. Yeah.
It could happen. That's one way to do it. De-identify yourself.
Yeah, it's just so interesting because knowing yourself is one of those questions that people ask first. It's like, and then matching what your attributes are to essentially what was in the past.
Well, that's why I love Socrates. I only know that I know nothing.
Right.
That was a good one. The more you know, the less you know. In a way, it's true.
Well, and developing e-learning programs is sort of similar because after a while you get, like, let's say you're Moodle. You get you say, okay, I'm this version of Moodle. How on earth do you reinvent yourself or rebrand? Right. Or it's very challenging.
But I have to correct one thing. When you're dealing with the learners, then Socrates would say, I only know they know nothing. Aww. Well, anyway, we are, believe it or not, out of time. It goes fast. It always goes fast.
It does.
So we will see you all next week. We may have a guest, or we'll just continue doing our talk. And Char, thank you for being the semi-guest today. We appreciate it.
Yeah,
That's
thank
great.
you.
I've known Char for over 20 years. Her husband worked with us. She's been working with us for a long time. We've done lots of courses and stuff together. Always fun.
Nice.
Anyway, have a good one, everyone. We will see you next week on eLearnChat. Susan, as always, a pleasure. And Harold,
thank you.
on to our next show. We're doing our next show now. If you want to hang around, our next show is called Sounding Great, all about voiceover, gear, audio recording, and everything having to do with your voice. Should be fun. Bye-bye. Thanks.
Bye, everyone.
And what did you learn today?